Welcome back to the horror analysis. We have a very special guest today. His name is Dave Kappler, and before I introduce Dave, I want to just set the table a little bit here and provide some context. But Dave and we go back about 14 years now. So when I first got into film, you were my cinematographer, my director of photography. And Dave has been a part of Frank Horror Productions ever since, all the way through. You shot most of my films.
I will never forget that meeting, the first time we met at Dunkin' Donuts on Route 70 in Cherry Hill across from the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
That was our first, you never know what you're going to get. You know, anybody, when you meet somebody cold like that. And apparently it worked out, because here I am 14 years later. Here we are.
You shot most of my films. Mm-hmm. You've done audio for productions, including The Hungry One, which was our season 2 fiction story on Frank Horror. And not to mention a number of still photography horror shoots that we worked on together. But all that being said, the reason that you're here is not because of our long history of working in production together. Why don't you explain to us what you did for a living?
Well, I was a police officer for 32 years. 16 of those years I was in patrol, and then I was promoted to detective and put into the major crimes crime scene unit at a large suburban police department just outside of Philadelphia in New Jersey. And I spent the next 16 years there, retiring 15 years ago from that.
So in general, first of all, start that over.
Reset it for a second.
Reset. Good to be here and doing another episode. It's the first time Dave, you and I are meeting. So in terms of what we're going to be talking today, since our focus is on death and aspects of death, can you talk a little bit about your work as a detective, as an investigator, and what sort of things relate to our topic?
I was, me or one of my counterparts were involved in every death investigation that the police department did, which was everything except for a hospice. So if you died at home, even if you were under a doctor's care, if you weren't in hospice, we would investigate that. And it sounds kind of weird, but the thing was, we always said that everything is a homicide until we figure out it was just a parking ticket. So you go into a case looking at it from the aspect that it could be much more serious than it looks like on face value, and go from there.
Is that something you learned as a patrolman as well?
Yeah.
You take nothing at face value.
You need to thoroughly investigate everything that you come across. You need to thoroughly investigate. And thorough investigations could take 2 minutes on certain cases and could take days on other cases. One of the things I remember in my job, we had to go to autopsies. And I remember one of the medical examiners said that you never look at what you think the cause of death is first, because then you might overlook something else. So, for example, let's say a guy drank like crazy, smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, never exercised, was 200 pounds overweight. You might suspect a heart attack. So you go looking at the heart right away, and you go right past another possible cause of death that, I mean, nothing as blatant as like gunshot wounds or stab wounds, but maybe he had another organ that failed and his heart was perfectly fine. So you want to try to avoid the obvious, so that the obvious doesn't obscure the sublime.
So in general, how often did the sublime end up being the case?
Not very.
Okay.
But often enough that it was worth
Okay.
Doing that. Even once is worth doing that, because you really want to get to the truth. And when you talk about, from what I understand, that the term forensics is has a Latin origin for truth. And that's where you want to get to what really happened. And you have witness accounts, but we dealt with physical evidence much more than witness accounts in what I did in the actual hands-on death investigations. And I did about 1,000 of them over my time.
Wow. Okay.
Fortunately, only in that time, I should have counted less than 20 homicides. We had a significant rate of suicide in our town, and then the rest were natural deaths that had to be investigated to make sure that they weren't. And I have a couple examples of those that we can talk about specifically.
What led you to want to join the police force in general, but then also go down that path of being a detective?
I always thought that police work would be exciting because you're not doing the same thing all the time. You're not working on an assembly line. You're not doing this, you're doing that. You're dealing with people. And, as cliche as it is, I like to help people. I mean, I remember a case where the lady had a pipe break in her house and her husband had just died and she had no idea what to do. So I sat there and, we got a hold of her insurance company for her, shut the water off, and you just help people because people are, in an emergency, people are helpless. It's like you get in a car accident. What are we going to do? Well, maybe you should get a tow truck for your car. I mean, the obvious just goes away when
people
you're
stop
in
thinking.
a stress situation like that. So, so that's, you get to be able to help people there. And it's the excitement. Who doesn't want to drive fast with their lights and sirens on and arrest people and carry a gun and all that stuff? But that all wears out after about 6 months. And it's like, oh, this thing's heavy, and poking me in the side. And when it was cool 6 months ago, but it all wears off, and you just settle into a routine, and along the same lines of helping people, that enforcement is helping people, because just something as simple as a speeding ticket in a neighborhood, that's helping the people that live in the neighborhood, because you try to back out of your driveway and everybody's going 50 miles an hour down the street. It doesn't help those people trying to get out of their driveway or keep them from getting in an accident. So there's many facets. Plus, there's so many different avenues you can pursue. It's funny that the guy that I replaced in the crime scene unit was also my training officer when I first came on the department. So we were pretty good friends after all that, so he took me under his wing and really showed me the ropes, and it's just, I just found it very interesting. It's hands-on, and I don't know. It just you get, it's something new, and where it kind of, the other stuff kind of wears off, and it's like, oh, I can do this now, and and if I had the opportunity to do something else new, I might have taken it, but I declined a couple opportunities because I really liked what I did.
So what's the transition like to go from uniformed police officer to crime scene detective?
For about 6 weeks, I was always with somebody that had experience, and I had prior training, and they had sent me to a couple of schools like basic crime scene processing, like fingerprinting and things like that. So I knew about those things, not necessarily how to do them for real, but I was able to, with the help of the other officer, the other detective that, like I said, was my training officer when I was new, he was able to train me and point out certain things. Like, he said, when we went to our first autopsy, he said, you always go get breakfast first so you have something to throw up. It's like, okay. It's just, it really kind of show you the ropes. And first autopsy was very interesting, and I did not throw up. So.
Yeah, and so what is that like, though, to see the first? Had you seen violent death or the aftermath of it before
Yes.
you had that job?
Yes, in patrol, we were the first on the scene at at deaths, and we would call in the detectives to follow up on it. So it wasn't like a completely new thing to me. I remember, I still remember my very first deceased person call, like it was yesterday. Sometimes I can't remember my name, but I can remember that one. Was it a gentleman died in his sleep, and he was old, and I had to help put him in the stretcher and have him taken out, and new experience.
So I'm wondering, before going into law enforcement, just in your own life growing up, what exposure, if any, did you have to death? In your family, in the neighborhood?
None.
None.
No. All of my relatives that died after I was on the police department. So I never was involved in any of that before I was on.
So, if you can you talk about what, just in terms of your own mental process of dealing with scenes that are, I guess, could be inherently tragic, some may be violent, some may not be violent, but what was the whole change in your thinking over time in terms of how you approach things?
You look at it from, well, there's two things. First of all, and it's going to sound callous, but you go, boy, glad that's not me. And then you look at it from a somewhat scientific point of view, like, okay, here's what I have to do. And it just happens to be the dead body, And I also think it has a little bit to do maybe with your religious beliefs about death and afterlife. And personally, mine are very biological. When the lights go out, the lights go out. That's the end of that. And there's no heaven, there's no hell. And that's just my personal beliefs, which is strange because when I grew up, my father was a Methodist minister. And he had certainly a very opposite outlook on things like that. But that's just the attitude that I've come to adopt over the years. So I never looked at it like, in light of that, I was never afraid of death. So I was afraid of dying. I didn't want to die. I wanted to do the process. But being dead, it's like, it only hurts the living if you're dead. So this person whose death I'm investigating is no longer anything. So it's and certainly, you have respect and dignity, and you try to, but in the long run, it's a scientific investigation. Really, you're just looking for the facts. You're looking for the evidence, and the oddities and the specific things that happened with that particular incident that might set it apart from something different, or a lot of things are in common with other.
So you step back and you're objective.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting you're saying that the person isn't a person. It's interesting, after somebody dies, we often refer to it like it's the body.
Yeah.
It's no longer Bob.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, because Bob has had his book shut.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other chapter in here for what happens afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So in the approach to this, like when you see a body and there's that intellectualization, it's all, you're using reason and ration to kind of look at the situation rather than emotion, which makes sense because that can be overwhelming, dealing with dead bodies all day long and feeling deep emotions. Were there ever times when, like, you found a body and it resonated with you at an emotional level? Like, that could have been my son, or,
Yeah, I don't particularly like to talk about the cases involving children, but they were a little bit different. But having kids of my own, you say, boy, that could be me, that parent sitting over there. That could be very easily me. And yeah, so it's a little strange in that way.
So in a case like that, how do you deal with that differently than you would in terms of your own defenses against something like that?
Yeah, it's in the
Versus
back
other-
of your mind, whereas on somebody, on a different set of circumstances, it might not be in the back of your mind that this could be, this could easily be a situation that I'm involved in. This could be one of my relatives or, something like that. But yeah, I don't, it's kind of like a pilot in an emergency. You run checklists in your head when you walk in. You walk in and there's somebody that's dead laying on the floor, and you make note of their position, and you try to think about how did they get into that position? Is that a position that they would be in if they just collapsed and fell? I remember there's a few specific cases that I'll talk about that are interesting in that way. I remember going to one house, and this gentleman was about 75 years old, as I recall, and he was fully dressed and sitting on the couch. The TV was on. He was sitting on the end of the couch. He had his arm on the armrest, and the other hand was in his lap. And the TV, like I said, the TV was on, and he had the remote control in his hand. And maybe he hit off, and that was it. But you look for the kind of the dark humor in things too. That make you giggle, and you giggle instead of cry. After all that, but yeah, this guy, he was just watching TV and his heart stopped, and that was it. And just dropped his head, and if you looked at him from the back, you'd think there's a guy sitting there watching TV, and there's no difference, except he was room temperature, which is a dead giveaway, no pun intended.
So Dave, having the luxury of knowing you this long, I know that your use of humor is constant, and it's on set, and it's part of your personality, and it's also like a way to handle stress, and that's a defense that we can use. But I think back to when I was kind of working with critical incident responses, and I went to a seminar, and there were some people that worked on like burn units and dealt with the trauma of that, and they would have like funny nicknames for the victims, and it wasn't out of meanness or spite. It was that was their way of kind of dealing with the horror of what they saw and what they experienced.
I think personally, for me, I would much rather have been in the field that I was in instead of the medical field, because if you're treating people, I'm treating people that don't hurt anymore. They're done. But I don't know that. I could muster the compassion, but I think it would bother me more in the back of my mind to deal with somebody that was hurt or sick than it would be, to deal with somebody that was already dead. I've been in a hospital quite a few times, and the medical people, they're special people. I don't know how they do it all day long. Especially because, I never had any of my customers complain. So, but, oh, this hurts, that hurts, and too late.
Yeah.
What about emotions in terms of dealing, when there has been a violent crime? Any difference in dealing with emotions if you're dealing with a perpetrator?
I did not routinely deal with the perpetrator. I was involved in some cases where I did on the periphery, but not directly involved with them. But I've interviewed murderers, people that commit murder. There's all different kinds of those people. There's people that are, I can't believe I did that, and now my life is ruined because I just did it in the moment. And there's people that are like, yeah, I probably should have thought about that a little bit more before I did it, but I'm still not sad that I did it. And then you have people that's like, yeah, do it again. I had and I wasn't in the police department, I was working on a documentary, and we interviewed a guy who was a drug kingpin who had just gotten out of jail after 25 years for 6 murders that he ordered. And I'll never forget. He said, this guy was very articulate, no remorse. He said, "This is business. These people know that if they do A, B, and C, they're supposed to do A, B, and C, and if they don't do A, B, and C, they're going to get murdered. They know it, and we have them murdered." And it was no different than, like, if you don't make 300 widgets, you're getting fired. It's just a different way of getting fired.
It's sort of an HR kind of policy.
Yeah. And that was, that's...
You get a performance improvement plan, and then you're out.
And it's funny because you look at that and you think, I it's going to sound weird, but I get it, because that's their way of functioning. That's how that particular business functions. And if you're in it, you know how it functions, and you shouldn't be surprised when the last thing that goes through your head is a bullet. Not that it's right. I don't want to say that it's right, but that's just that. You have the person, and I'll talk about a specific incident where this took place. But you have somebody that their wife's cheating on them, and they finally got to the brink and they murder their wife. And, it's something that happened over time, and it just, they got to the breaking point, and that was it. And we had one gentleman who solved that problem by hitting his wife over the head with a fire extinguisher until she was dead. Funny things happen. Not that the fire extinguisher over the head is comical, but this guy, he did that, and he came to the police station. It was a Friday or Saturday night. We were just busy as can be. And he comes up, and he goes to the window, and he says, "Hello." And the desk sergeant says, "Listen, pal, I'm really busy. Just have a seat on the bench over there. We'll get to you in a minute." And it was like 45 minutes before they got around to him, and he's still sitting on the bench, sitting with his legs crossed. And he said, "All right, yeah, what is it?" He said, "I murdered my wife." "What?" And he got swooped in, and so you don't always catch the guy so quick with those. And we always said when you had a murder-suicide, we always caught the guy right away. But the murderer, and then again, you talk about the dark humor. You ask one of the detectives there, "Hey, you think you'll ever catch the guy?" He's right there, and you don't say that in front of the family, but it's a way to deal with things, to make it, like a little bit of look at the light side of a dark situation.
Yeah, I mean, your everyday reality in your job starts with the death.
Yeah,
and that's most people go in and they sit at a desk and work spreadsheets or a checkout counter or something, but you're dealing with death day in, day out.
Yeah, and it's funny because people ask me how I dealt with it, and then I say, "Did you ever think about how a funeral director deals with it, or a medical examiner, or somebody that works in the morgue? Did you ever think about it?" "Well, no, because you're the first one there." I said, "Well, they're the last ones there, and it's really no different. All you do is deal with dead people all the time." And I don't want to say I dealt with dead people all the time, because we dealt with burglaries and robberies and rapes and murders and, well, not dead people, but all kinds of crimes. But most of those were not in the horror genre of things.
Mm-hmm. How about, you mentioned the families.
Mm.
What was your interaction with the families? Did you have to, in some cases, break the news to them?
I have, yeah. Yeah, that's not easy. Because that's a situation like we were talking about before, where I could put myself in their place. Hey, listen, we just want to let you know that we just got word from the police in Schenectady, New York, that your son was killed in a car accident. And it's like all you want to do is leave, because not because you don't want to do anything, it's because there's nothing you can do. Can I get you a glass of water? What can you do? Tell somebody their kid just died. and out of the blue. It's not like your kid's been sick in Children's Hospital for 6 months, and I'm sorry, the cancer caught up to him. This is like he was walking across the street and got waffled by a bus, and you have no warning, no anything, and you just don't know what. Again, you feel helpless.
Yeah.
You don't know what you can do for these people, and you don't want to. You don't get, well, I got to go now, and and then you're like, well, I don't want to stay here because maybe they want me to go, maybe they want me to leave, maybe they want to call another relative or clergy or something. That's never easy, and I've had to do that on several occasions. Yeah.
Well, dealing with that, the hard part is dealing with the living.
Yes.
Having to give that, and
Exactly.
also. I would think knowing that just by giving that information, you've just started that person or that family down a whole road of grief that you can't do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly when you know what the cause was. Somebody got hit by a bus.
Yeah, and you know that they're getting a terrible mental picture that you can't erase.
Right.
So you try to. Like the common question is, how did it happen? And you sugarcoat it a little bit. You don't say, well, he was crossing at a light and a bus ran a red light and hit him and knocked one of his legs came off. I mean, it's unfortunate. Unfortunately, there was a case where there was a traffic accident and he was hit by a vehicle and as a pedestrian, and he didn't survive. Despite all the best efforts of all the medical and the paramedics and everybody else that tried to help him, he wasn't able to survive the collision. So,
And what's interesting about the victims, or the families of victims, that they would be considered secondary victims. What I've found in some of my research is that the incident of trauma and PTSD is higher in the family members and those secondary victims than it is in actual survivors of crime. So like if you were mugged, raped, you're probably going to have some level of trauma, but it's oftentimes family and friends and the people around them that are exhibiting those, the images that they can't get out of their head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be secondary trauma, sure.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if they're murdered, trauma's over, but...
Right. Well, if it's murder, then there's the whole piece of who did it, and then, it's a whole other process that starts.
So not to harp on the defense stuff too much, but like, let's say you have one of those conversations with the family, and it's uncomfortable and you want to get the hell out of there. After a day like that, how do you go home and have a normal life with your family?
It kind of all depends on when during the shift it happens, because if it happens early in the shift and you have 10 other things to do that weren't so traumatic, it'll dampen that, But if it's like you work 3 to 11 and you get called at 5 of 11 to go give a notification, that's gonna. One of the I never kept things from my family, and as you know, my former wife was a police officer also, so she understood what was going on there. But I never kept things from my kids. Didn't go into the gory details, but they knew what I did, and they knew, they learned about life early. And you give a tour of the town, I had suicide in that house as we're driving down the street, and they said, you really don't have to point all that out every time, This is the 12th time you've told us you had a suicide in that house there, so. Yeah, and that was, I don't know if that was helpful to me, but I didn't want to hide things from them, because if they don't know what you do, they're going to guess what you do, and they might not guess right. And that might be worse than knowing the real thing. That you don't throw a lot of details into the mix,
And I would think depending on when, how old your kids are, when they grew up, depending on what they watch on TV with all the crime shows, and just getting notions of detectives getting so involved in each case, and so emotionally involved and angry and all of this. And it's a misconception, is really
We
what
never
you're saying.
watched any of that stuff.
You didn't?
No, never watched any of the crime shows. I watched CSI out of curiosity when it first came out, and it was so bizarre and inaccurate that it wasn't entertaining to me. It may be entertaining to somebody who doesn't know the process, where you stick a fingerprint card in and you see it flash on the screen, and 30 seconds later it comes out, and it's not how it works. You put a Q-tip that has DNA on it, and before the next ad, it spits out the name and address of the guy that has the thing. That's not how that works. So, it was frustrating to watch that. I couldn't watch it in an entertaining sort of way. Much as like I have doctor friends that are like, oh, I watch any of his doctor shows because, it's like all I do is yell at the TV the whole time. Hey, you can't do that, can't do that. And everybody has everything solved in an hour. And it's not the case. One example, not a death example, but we had a car dealership that got broken into on a Saturday night, and as you know, they're usually closed on Sundays. And the people that did it went through the entire dealership. It was a big place, and they didn't miss a beat in the whole place. And it was hard to figure out. Like we, tried to fingerprint this and try to look at this and that, to see how they got in and blah, blah, blah. And long story short, we were there for about 8 hours, me and another guy. We were there for about 8 hours going through all this stuff. And I said to somebody, is that soda can on that guy's desk? The guy's desk is really neat, but there's a soda can on the desk. And he says, yeah, that's not his. He'd never leave a soda can on the desk. So I get DNA off the soda can, ended up being the guy that broke in, one of the guys, and he gave up the other two guys. And just something as simple as that's out of place to me. Is that out of place to you? No, I'm surprised there's not 20 soda cans on that guy's desk. So that'd be a case where now you say, all right, did the bad guy leave a soda can amongst the 20 and you got to send all of them in for DNA? Or, that's where you got to make a decision like that. So I remember we had a bank robbery, and there was the video of the guy walking into the bank. He took a cigarette and just flicked it when he walked in, and went outside, and there must have been 50 cigarettes. This is back a long time ago when people smoked a lot. There must have been 50 cigarettes on the ground there. So picked them all up, put them in envelopes, took them up to the lab, and the lab's up there going, no, you're gonna have to get a little bit more specific than that, because we're not. This is back in the inception days of DNA when. Now it's so commonplace. But yeah, back in the mid-'90s, you weren't doing that all the time. And so that was, you had to try to figure out, okay, it didn't have a brown filter, so we can get rid of all the ones that don't have a brown filter, so that cut them in half or whatever. And so, then you look at things like that. And then you look at, like, how did he grab the door handle? Okay, well, it's a door handle's like a cup thing, so he grabbed it on the back. So we need to try to get fingerprints off the back of the door handle. So you take the door handle off, and you take it to the police station and use some chemical processes to try to get the fingerprints off the back of the door handle. And what do you do next? Well, he came over there and he was leaning on that counter over there. And then. It's funny, and here's another funny thing about that bank robbery with the guy that flicked the cigarette. He took a deposit slip and wrote on the back his demand note, and he said, "This is a robbery. I have a GAN, and I want all the money." And he crossed out the A in GAN and put a U over top of it because he realized he spelled gun wrong. So right now you can eliminate everybody with an IQ over 50. Or anybody that went to third grade and above. So there's just those funny things, and I still have a picture of that somewhere.
There was a movie called Take the Money and Run. It was one of Woody Allen's earliest movies. And he goes into a bank and he passes a note. And the teller's going, I have a gub. And no, it's a gun. No, that's a B. And they're calling all the other tellers over, like, what does that look like to you? That is not a gun.
Yeah, I remember another bank robbery we had where the guy took the teller gave him the bait money out of the drawer, and the bait money is a stack of $20 bills with maybe 4 or 5 on the top and 4 or 5 on the bottom, and then in the middle the ones are all cut out, they're not real, and in that hollowed out space there's a couple of things. There's a radio receiver, and there's a die pack, and there is an explosive charge, and also capstun, the pepper spray in there. So when you take it out of the drawer, it becomes armable. When you go through the vestibule out the front door, there's triggers in the doorway that arm it to set off that 30-second timer to give time to get out of the bank. So, and it would explode 30 seconds out of the bank. So we had the guy took the bait money, he ran around, the bank was on a corner, he ran around the corner, and we go down the street to see where he ran to, and there was a shirt there that had a bunch of holes in it, and it smelled like capstun, and it had red dye all over it, and there was money all over the place. And apparently what he had done was stuck it up under his shirt, and that's when it went off. So we checked the hospitals, but nobody showed up. So he was hurting, that guy. And I told those people, I said, they were very afraid, those poor ladies in the bank. And I said, there's no way, I've never in all my years had a bank get robbed two times in a row. And sure enough, the next Saturday, they got robbed again by completely different people. And I was like, I walked in and they're looking at me like, all right, any more lies for us? Because we don't believe you now that we got hit twice in a row.
Yeah, I remember about 20 years ago, PNC banks in the city were getting hit constantly, like 1 week after the other, and sometimes, twice a month. And there was just something about those branches. I was doing critical incident interventions then. But I've got a question for you. You talked about sort of how you have approached dealing with death, on a scene in a professional context. Do you have any observations, memories about how some of your peers dealt with it that may have been different?
No,
it was all pretty much
the same. Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot. I'm sure that down deep it's had an effect somewhere along the line, but I don't feel it. And most of the people that I know don't. I mean, most of the people that I know think I'm a little nuts anyhow, but it's not because of that. Notwithstanding dead people, I like to. I'm going to say don't act crazy, but I like to have fun and goof around a little bit, and maybe that's a defense mechanism. But no, I think we were all pretty much the same. It was like, okay, it's not me, and we have a job to do, and let's try to figure this out, and then we'll go on to the next one, and on to the next one.
What about how you perceive other people? Have you noticed that change because of the job? So, for instance, you have, what I'm getting at is like the people who, not police officers, but they watch the news all day. They watch real reports of crime. They tend to be much more paranoid and much more distrusting of other people. Have you seen your perception of people in general change in their motives or?
I don't think so. Like, I don't stereotype people, if that answers your question.
And maybe not so much a stereotype, but I'm wondering if it makes you more, your default position is suspicious.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, I'll give you an example of that on the Facebook page for my town. People post what they deem to be suspicious things that they find on their doorbell camera, on their ring camera. Mm-hmm. So there was a guy who they took a picture of him in their driveway in between their cars. And I looked at when I saw the picture, I'm going, that's not good. He's up to no good. And then you read the article or the story that went with it, and they said, and we went out and confronted him and found out that he had lost his dog, and he was looking for his dog, and he came back later with the dog and said, here, I found my dog, and I just want to let you know that wasn't a story. I really did lose my dog, and so, but my first thought was, no, this can't be good, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Because again, like I said, everything's a murder until it's a parking ticket. And, I don't think that again, stereotype or, I see it's more circumstantial than it is the person doing it, it's different. You see a 5-year-old kid walk up the driveway. It's a little different than a 30-year-old man walking up the driveway. But then you wonder, okay, why is that 5-year-old kid out? And they find, it's their kid or something. But the first thing you think of is something bad.
Yeah.
And then you figure it out that it's not always something bad.
That makes sense. And I'm going to turn that to you for a second, having worked in mental health as long as you have.
Yeah.
Do you find that that's kind of changed the way that you view people as well? That your take on humanity?
Going to sound real mental healthy here. Tell me more what you mean.
I'm not getting at anything.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I want to answer your question.
Just how the job changes your view of humanity. Because again, in a field like that, much kind of like Dave's, you're not dealing with people at their best. You're seeing the worst.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes people are presenting themselves at their worst, but I think that in most people, at least people that I've dealt with, which has been on an outpatient basis. I mean, people coming to me. I've never worked in an inpatient setting. You always look for where that strength is. It's like if someone is feeling utterly helpless and they're not functioning, well, they need something else. They need medication, they may need a hospital. So there's a certain process, of when you're talking to somebody, you step back and you have to be objective and you get the facts and you try to paint a picture. And then at the same time, it's looking for kind of where's the exception. Okay, you're really, really depressed. You're really, really anxious. Okay. How are you, in what parts of your life are you functioning? Because that becomes the handle that you can grab onto to help the person. And the other thing is that I do what I do, or anybody in the mental health field, is because you want to see people change and improve. If nobody improved, that would be pretty depressing. But still, it's looking for the exception, or it's looking for the inconsistency.
Yeah, I bring it up just because there are similar discussions of how the career can impact you.
Oh, no question. So there's a certain element of you are presenting yourself, and you want to present and be caring and concerned. At the same time, it's asking a lot of questions, and that becomes a lot more of an issue when you're doing an evaluation or you're reviewing a medical record. Someone says, I can't function, I can't do this, this, and this, but wait a second, you are able to go to concerts and you go out to eat and you have friends. How does that work? And then that goes to credibility. But I fortunately have never encountered anyone who would just be like the guy that you were talking about in prison, where it's like, well, it's just business. You violate rules A, B, and C, nothing personal. I mean, there's a certain sociopathic quality to that, where there's no, and I have not encountered anyone like that.
Well, we always said that nobody ever called the police station and said, listen, we got about 10 or 15 people over here, we're having a party, we're having a really good time, there's no problem at all, can you send the police? So, it's always, you're there 99% of the time. Your initial response is going to be to something that's reported as a problem, not necessarily a crime or not necessarily a serious, significant crime, but it's always a problem. There's go over to Route 100 and A Street, there's a car broken down in the middle of the highway. Okay, well, that's a problem. It's not a crime, but it's a problem, so you got to go solve the problem. And, that's just something as simple as, okay, you push it over the side of the road and get the people to call a tow truck. It's something like that, and things are, other things are more complicated than that. But yeah, everything you do is in response to somebody reporting a problem of some degree. And you need to, I think you need to make an effort, and not everybody does. I think you need to make an effort to remember that you're in a town of, let's just say 150,000 people, and you dealt with 30 people tonight and they all had problems. Well, there's 149,000, whatever the math is, that didn't have a problem that night. So,
and that helps you keep it in perspective.
Yeah.
So
Where but the first thing you think of is how many of those 149,000 people got away with something and didn't get caught by the police, and then the remainder are like, well, we just sat there watching TV and didn't have a, the worst thing that happened was a deer came up and ate the hosta out front.
That makes me think, I can't speak to the veracity of this statistic, but I just read that the average person in their lifetime crosses paths with 14 murderers. I have no idea if that's true or not, but...
Well, you never know. I mean, somebody 15 years from now, you could run into a situation where, I'm in a different set of circumstances, and something has pushed me to the brink of where the only solution that I can come up with is to kill somebody. You just don't know that, where I would never think of doing that now. Yeah. I would never want to hurt anybody. But you don't know what the circumstances are going to be down the line.
That's true.
So you could very well, be in contact with maybe not 14 murderers, but 14 potential murderers. I would go with that statistic. But most murders are solved because most murders, there's a connection between the victim and the murderer of some sort. And that's when you investigate a murder, not from the crime scene evidence standpoint, but from that, the first thing you do is victimology. And you completely investigate the victim to see where a connection could be. Okay, what did that person do today? Who are that person's friends? That person make any new friends lately? And like I said, that you run that checklist through your head, and there's a whole bunch of things to look into, and oh, wait a minute, he had a run-in with a motorist. He yelled at somebody that was driving down the street in front. He thought he was speeding. So, okay, well, do you have any idea what kind of car it was? Do you have a camera at your house that would have showed it? And you look at all these things, and it's okay. So you find out, you get the license plate, you go see that guy. Hey, listen, the guy that yelled at you, he got murdered today. What were you doing at 11 o'clock? Humming, and cleaning the blood off his fingernails.
Yeah.
No, I was at work at 11 o'clock, and I just flipped out because I was speeding, and that made me speed more to get away from him. I thought he was nuts. So, but you investigate, and that's all those different branches and avenues that you go down based on what you learn about the victim. And that's why people, why don't you go catch the murderer instead of investigating, my relative that just got murdered? Well, because that's how we find murderers, is to do that.
So what do you have for us for good stories?
Oh boy, what do you want to know?
Give us some treats.
Okay, I wrote down some incidents here. let's see. We had a call for an odd odor coming from a house, and that odor is the odor of a decomposing body smells like nothing else. It's even different than an animal. So if you had a dead squirrel under your porch, it's different. So the police, the patrol guys went there and they couldn't find anything. They went all through the house, couldn't find anything. But they did notice that in one of the bedrooms, it looked as though somebody had taken one of those plastic, they call them t-shirt bags, the shopping bags that we used to be able to get in New Jersey, but it's illegal now. So the jail is full of people that use plastic grocery bags. You two murderers, we're going to let you go because we got to fit these plastic bags of people in here. Taken those, and they had things in them, all different things in them, and it looked as though they had gone to the doorway and thrown them in the corner. So there was there's probably 500 of these bags piled up in the corner like that. And that's the room where the odor was more significant than anywhere else in the house, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the odor was emanating from, but just that's where it was more significant. So we checked the whole house. We couldn't find anything in the whole house. And they said, well, we're going to have to dig through this pile of stuff. And somebody said, well, look at the bed. And the bed was in the corner of the room, but the long part of the bed was up against the wall, but the headboard was about a foot away from the wall. And that just looked out of place to that person. And long story short, lady had gone back in there and pulled the bed against herself and died. And much like an animal who goes out in the woods to die, people do that too. It's called burrowing. And they go out into an area or they go to an area and, kind of conceal themselves, and then they die. And she had gone to CVS down the street and bought things, and that was not phobia, what do you call it?
Hoarding?
Yeah, I guess, but she had no purpose to buy these things, except for to throw them in the room. So, that was, I thought that was a strange one. But it's funny because, you work with a couple other people and you go, oh, I saw that before, And one of the guys we worked with was from another agency, and he was retired from a city crime scene unit, and then he went to work for another agency that we worked with, and this guy was saltier than the Dead Sea. I mean, he had seen everything 10 times. I thought I saw it all until I saw him, and he knew right away everything. I mean, we had a guy that shot himself in the head with a shotgun in the bathtub, which was nice because it made easier cleanup, and that was. I say that kind of like comically, but that was a consideration. It's like I did that on purpose. He went in there to do that. I had people lay tarps out and then shoot themselves, so it didn't make a mess. But this guy, there was a shotgun, it was a single shot shotgun, and there was a spent shotgun shell on the floor next to the gun, because he had sat on the edge of the tub and shot himself and then fell into the tub, and the gun fell out this way. So you're thinking, well, this guy he shot himself in the head, so he probably wasn't able to cycle the shotgun to get the spent shell out. So we opened the shotgun and there was a spent shell in there. And this old salty guy said, yeah, we see that all the time. People fire a test shot just to see if they can handle the noise before they really do it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, because we're thinking, oh man, somebody came in here and shot this guy and made it look like a suicide. That's a suicide. And, so you're always learning things like that. We had a guy who was hit by a car, was crossing the street, and he got hit by a car that was doing about 50 miles an hour when he got hit. And first of all, it took him out of his shoes, and that was common that pedestrians would get knocked out of their shoes because their feet would stretch. And as they got yanked out, the momentum would pull them right out of their shoes. So their shoes would be where the collision happened, and they'd be down the street, 50 feet or something like that. But this guy had a giant handprint on his right butt, and big red handprint. So we didn't notice it until we got down to morgue because everybody gets disrobed and before they do the autopsy. So I said to the doctor, who was another guy that it was like his 3 millionth autopsy or something, one of these guys. And we had a couple doctors who were like, don't even talk to me, and another guy that you didn't want to ask him any questions because you'd be there for 3 days listening to the answer. And he was one of those guys who said, all right, doc, what's with the handprint? And he said, we call that a hand slap. And what happens is that person must have had their hands at their side, and instead of slapping themselves, their body hit their hand when they got hit. So it would be the same result, but the opposite reaction. And then of course somebody else was saying, "Oh, here comes a car! Let's hurry up!" But yeah, that was so. Those are the kind of things that you learn, and only because you might see it again. Not that it's my life is fulfilled now that I know all about hand slap. So, what else do we have here? When suicides, females tend to commit suicide in a way that they won't disfigure themselves. They will either take pills or turn the car on in the garage, or less common would be hanging themselves. They will hang themselves with something wide, like a robe tie, instead of a clothesline, so that the ligature is not so prominent, because they want to look good for their last appearance. Whereas guys are like, I don't know, blood her head off and it's whatever. We had a guy drive into the police station parking lot and shoot himself in the head in his car. It was convenient. But we went to his house and found all kinds of books on suicide, and he told him to look into it, and he had terminal disease, and he wasn't going to live. It was his decision as to when to stop this. But he shot himself in the mouth, went straight up and out his head. There was an exit wound on top of his head, and we couldn't find the bullet anywhere, which is weird because that makes you think somebody cleaned up afterwards. That's the first thing you think of. And we looked all over that car. The bullet had hit the headliner and crossed through between the headliner and the roof and came out, and it was landing on the sun visor, the folded up sun visor on the passenger side.
Wow.
So it's just the weirdest stuff like that. And how do you do that trajectory with the string? So
yeah, and that's when it's like you've got the body there, and you understand why, and then everybody gets scientific. They get clinical.
Yeah.
What were the physics? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you say things like, "Excuse me," but he's not kind of in the way. But that's too bad. He's supposed to be there. I think I mentioned to you we had a young lady who found out she was pregnant, and she decided to commit suicide. So she hung herself from her ceiling fan in her bedroom. And when I got there, she was one of the uniform officers was leaning on the switch that if he had moved the right way, it would have turned the ceiling fan on, which would have disturbed the crime scene. And you don't want to disturb the crime scene. That house, and it's funny because of things you notice, that house had vertical blinds in it, real wide ones. And when we were there, we noticed that one of them was out of, like it wasn't lined up with the rest. It was turned a little weird. And you could see it from the outside too. And that house, it was 5 years until those people moved out. Before that, they must have never gone in that room again. They must have just closed the door and see the blind like that. Yeah. So that's my guess is they just never went back in that room, which I can understand that. So here's another funny one. I was involved. I was the president of the State Identification Association for a couple years, and through that I made a bunch of contacts with other departments. And I ended up being pretty good friends with the guy who was in charge of all of the crime scene investigations in New York Police Department. And so I called up there to ask him a question once. And I said, is Captain so-and-so there? And he said, no, his wife just called and wanted something from the grocery store. So he went out to the grocery store to go get it for her. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, New York City, guy's in charge of crime scene unit and he's out running errands for his wife. You know, it's just like the absurdity, not the absurdity, but the, I don't know what the right word is.
How mundane it is?
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's like, what, this doesn't fit, you know, but it's, people are just living their lives and they just happen to be that's their job to do. And, you know, they got other stuff they got to do, you know. There was one case, which I still to this day think was a homicide. And when the police officers got to the house, the wife said, he's upstairs and I'm sorry, he was a royal pain in the ass. And went up there and the guy was a terminal cancer patient, but not under hospice. And there was a pillow, he was bleeding from his nose, which was not uncommon for the type of cancer he had. And this is after having discussions with the doctor on the phone, you know, like what's normal here, what's not normal. Because the medical examiner has the final say on whether something's in the manner of death. Whether it's a homicide or a suicide or natural or unknown or, you know, whatever. He said no, in that guy's condition, it would not be uncommon for him to bleed out of his nose if he was that close to terminal. And there was a pillow next to him that had a depression in it that, if you looked at it, would maybe from an abstract, I don't know, maybe. I think back and I wonder if I wanted it to look like it, but it looked like it was put over his head or his face and she smothered him. That's what it looked like to me, and then took the pillow off. And doctor, after the autopsy, the doctor called it a natural death and he wouldn't go for the homicide. And he said, there's just not enough evidence for me to call it a homicide. So I don't know if that lady got away with killing her husband, but I mean, the guy was going to die next week anyhow. If you can look at it like that, but you know, who are we to decide when that's going to be? That's not, you know, if he'd have said, you know, just end me or something, you know, and he didn't have the strength to do it himself, or it's just kind of hard to smother yourself. We did have a guy drown himself once. That was interesting. But you know, that's not up to her to decide when to kill him or when to let him die. Because I mean, he could have lingered for forever, and you know, not had he had a zero quality of life. But it's just it's not up to somebody else. You know, unless your name's Kevorkian. You know.
One of those unusual cases, and it's well known in Philadelphia. In fact, there's a documentary now on, I don't know if it's on Netflix or Prime. It's a woman, I think her name was Susan Greenberg, and this is a case where she
stabbed 22 times and was a suicide?
Lived in Manayunk, and her fiance tried to get in, the door was locked from the inside, but she had like 20 stab wounds, some of which were in the back, and it was first ruled a homicide, then changed to suicide, and it's still unanswered because they can't figure how somebody stabs themselves 22 times, and it's still an open-ended kind of thing.
That's determination.
And an unconventional way to do it, given that most females wouldn't stab themselves like that.
We had a case where husband called the wife at home and said, I'm on the way home to pick you up. She was under the care of a psychiatrist and he was going to take her to her appointment. And when he got there, he found her dead in the bedroom, in the master bedroom. And let me preface this with, I was certified as a blood spatter analyst, to do analysis, and it has to find court analysis. It's not nearly as impressive as it sounds.
I've watched Dexter, so I know.
Oh, well, see, you know, that's, that explains everything.
Thank you.
She had, and it's funny because blood all over the place. And she had cut her wrists with no success, so she took an electric carving knife and tried to cut her head off with the electric carving knife. So, as weird as it is, the first thing that I thought of was, I can use this in one of my classes as, a blood spatter analysis, because we figured out from the patterns in the blood exactly what happened. She cut herself on, I don't remember the sequence exactly now, but she cut herself on one wrist, and you could see the blood on the wall where she did it. She did it in front of a mirror, and then she did it on the other side, and you could see that, and then based on where the razor blade was dropped, you could tell the order of that. And I, like I said, I don't remember the details. This is a long time ago. I mean, we're going back probably almost 30 years ago for this, so I just remember that. And then she tried on one side with no luck, and then tried on the other side, and finally hit her carotid artery, and then had the blood shooting across the room. But there was a suitcase. They had just come back from a trip somewhere, and there was a suitcase standing up on the end, and the wheels. There was a blood trail leaning up to the wheels, so that suitcase had been moved through blood. He asked the guy, hey, he says, I don't know, I might have moved it when I don't know what I did when I was up there. I just saw that, so it's entirely possible that I moved it. And, again, the house was locked, and there was no question that it was a suicide, because there was no other indication. If somebody was going to do that to you and you didn't want to have them do it to you, you probably would have some indication that there was a fight. Mm-hmm. And that was the only indication that anything was out of place. So, is that, and given her, we talked to the doctor, and, totality of the circumstances determined it was a suicide. So I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty unique. I got a story for now to tell. And I'm looking through this a couple years later. I found a book of old crime scene pictures from our town, and I see a picture. You see the picture with the ruler next to it. Picture of an electric carving knife. The next picture is a guy that a big gash on the side of his head, and I go look up the case, and another guy tried to cut his head off with a carving knife. I said, "There must be something in the water here." I don't know what the heck is going on. So yeah, that was pretty interesting. We had a case where this was a homicide. We found a lady laying in her bed, covered in blood, and we looked around a little bit, and she had a stab wound in her neck. And so we figured she had been murdered, because there wasn't any knife around anywhere. And based on that, she probably would have gone unconscious very quickly and would not have been able to get up, put the knife somewhere, and get back in bed, because you only have seconds once that carotid artery goes. So we found it behind the nightstand, the knife behind a nightstand. And then we found this took hours. When we moved her, we found a bloody fingerprint on the sheet that could only have been, if it wasn't hers, it could only have been somebody else that was there. That doesn't say they did it, but somebody else was in there with blood on them and touched that. So, that with that information, that's when you find out who the fingerprint belongs to, and then you interview that person, and that's how you determine. So, as it turned out, it was her son-in-law. They lived with her daughter in the basement, and he had been making advances that she was not interested in. So he took care of business, and then took care of business.
Wow.
So, yep.
Wow.
Yep. So, we had some interesting ones. And that was one, it was on a main road too, so I pointed that out to my kids, I don't know, 50 times probably. We could have solved that one by now. But, that's, it's a diversity of things, and like I said, there's a whole bunch of different stuff that you do differently, and that's what keeps it interesting, is that nothing's the same. it's I mean it's there's stuff that's similar, and then there's people that just have downright bad luck. We had a guy. There was a above ground pool with a deck around it, and the deck was in pretty bad shape. So he was out there with an electric leaf blower blowing the leaves off the deck, and the pool had about this much water in it. So one of his feet went through the deck, and he fell over backwards into the pool, and his foot was still stuck in the deck, but his head was underwater.
Ooh.
And so he drowned. And, the leaf blower was still on the porch, still blowing leaves when we got there.
Wow.
Half an hour later. And it's like, man, I was never going to say I had some bad luck today. Seeing this poor guy, oh, man.
That is awful.
Yeah, it's like, wow. I can't imagine what he did to deserve that. If that theory is well, he deserved it. No, he didn't deserve that.
No,
That's like a death right out of Final Destination.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. And then another thing, you get a call in the middle of the night, because I was on call 3 weeks out of the month. You get a call in the middle of the night, and you get the description, and you start thinking about it. Like you got a call one night. It was a couple weeks before Christmas, and the phone rang, and I reached over and I picked it up. Hello, and my wife said, "You're talking on the remote for the TV." Oh, and, hello, so yeah, we had a guy. He got caught in a mixer, and now he's dead. So we need you to go down to such and such a place. So we go down there, and you're thinking, you're caught in a mixer. Now what the heck? You develop a mental picture of what you think it might be like, and
Like a cement mixer?
no, all he said was mixer. So I'm thinking, the guy got like his tie caught in the stand mixer in the kitchen, and who knows, So it turns out it's an industrial mixer about the size of this room that had a bunch of paddles on a central thing, and it would mix up all kinds of different stuff. And it had a thing at the bottom that opened up to dump out whatever they had mixed the ingredients. And on the top, there was a grate that they would put the bags of ingredients on, cut them, and it would fall through the grate. And if you remove the grate, there was a lockout that would keep the thing from working when it wouldn't work if the grate was missing. So this all the planets aligned for this poor guy. He was in there scraping away, and they put a putty knife in to bypass the switch for that. And the other guy leaned over the on and off switch, leaned over the railing to see if the chute was open at the bottom, and he hit the on and off switch. And guy got, by the time he got turned up, he would made a couple of revolutions in there. So that was interesting. Yeah, it wasn't anything like I thought it was going to be, but yeah. But again, not me. Got a job to do here. Somebody's got to do it, and we got to do it the best we can.
It's interesting what you're describing is. A scene like that would be like a scene from a horror film, if you were to film that, and yet you're talking about stuff happens, real low probability, but all the forces are combined.
Industrial accident. Yeah.
Industrial accident.
But then you investigate. I mean, as soon as we found out what happened, started to investigate. All right, was there a problem between these two guys, and he was taking the opportunity to knock him off.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big investigation there, and that took. I don't remember it. I mean, it wasn't. We didn't figure it out that night, but that was determined to be a homicide. Now here's something to.
Wait, that was a homicide?
It was a homicide, but it wasn't a murder. Now here's something that needs to be cleared up, because this is something that every time the medical examiner calls something a homicide, everybody gets up in arms when they haven't made an arrest. Well, homicide only means that person died at the hands of another. So the causes of death are homicide, suicide, natural, and undetermined. So suicide is at your own hand. Natural is, accidental, and then undetermined. So this was a homicide because the actions of this guy caused that guy to die. But it's not a criminal homicide. So when you see on the news, the medical examiner said it's a homicide, so, why isn't this person being arrested? Because he didn't, it's not a murder. He didn't do it on purpose. It's an accident, but it's an accident, but somebody died as a result of the actions of another person, direct actions of another person. If he'd have gone in that thing and hit the switch himself, accident, but the other guy did it. So that was a homicide, but not a murder. So
Interesting distinction.
Yeah.
Useful too.
yeah.
Dave, I got a question for you. You have mentioned that your job would start at the death, but did you have any situations where when you arrived at the scene, the person was not passed yet?
No. I didn't get one until the end was gone. They were gone.
Okay,
They wouldn't call me
okay,
because they would get that person to the hospital.
okay,
And we had cases where somebody was taken to the hospital, probably dead, but they tried, like, they're doing CPR on the guy and take him to the hospital. He died in the hospital. And then the investigation starts back at the scene, and then you go to the hospital and
Right.
check vital. But no, it was no.
I didn't know if
But-
all the
well-
years of patrol that you, as a first responder.
Yeah, you do. I mean, we would investigate things as like an aggravated assault, like that. In a case we were talking about, but that. I mean, we had a case where there was a fight at a diner on the front steps, and one guy stabbed another guy, and he wasn't dead when they put him in the ambulance, but he was when they got him to the hospital. So, yeah, that might fit your question. But they didn't call us until after he had gone to the hospital and died. So, but we probably would have got called for that. If he didn't die, we probably would have got called for that too.
There's a lot of times where, as a first responder, you're directly there when the person passes, and you're with them when they transition like that. So it affects people in different ways.
I have had that happen. A car accident, where we witnessed a car accident, and the person died while we were right there. Certainly alive. I don't want to go into a whole bunch of details, but the person was ejected from the car and walked up and fell down in front of me, and he was dead when he hit the ground.
Wow.
That was interesting.
Well, thank you for, on that note,
Yeah.
thanks for an interesting discussion.
Yeah,
you're
thank you.
welcome.
Some
Thank
of the
you.
stories I had not heard or not known before, but this was fascinating. Thanks, Dave.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
Glad to share. Worked out. So I hope your audience enjoys,
I think that was
or
extremely fascinating.
maybe not enjoy, but find it interesting.
Yeah.
So.
Lots of interestings.